So, hello. Greetings. It's Dr. Thomas Daffin here, and this is my weekly, more or less, talk about politics, mainly in the UK and Europe, about Brexit, but I'm bringing in other world issues. And it's each Sunday I've been fasting and recording a talk since the 1st of January, effectively, 2019. We're now into November. It's November the 3rd. Gosh, it's been a ridiculous ride. For those of you that care about Britain and the future of our country, it's been an absolute nightmare, actually. I watched in horror and as the Conservative Party has degenerated into a Brexit fanatical kind of cult based on lies. And we now have the architect of lying as a strategy, Mr. Boris Johnson, in charge of this apparent, government. I mean, that's what they call it. But a government comes from the Greek word to steer, and it's supposed to be done light touch with someone of integrity. And Mr. Johnson is the least intelligent, morally intelligent Prime Minister I've ever known. I hope he soon falls from office. I noticed that this week the police have handed on to the Crown Prosecution Service, I think, a bunch of files to do with, his misdeeds when he was running the Vote Leave campaign with Dominic Cummings, who's now his right-hand man in Downing Street. These people are criminals, in my opinion, and I'm happy to see them both in prison. They shouldn't be having anything to do with the running of our country. And I think it shows up the need for a written constitution so that people of such lack of morality can never get close to it. We need more checks and balances in place. Apparently the monarch has no power over the situation and just has to rubber stamp what the Prime Minister says. Well, I disagree. I've written to the monarch. If that's really the case, then there's a call for changing the constitution. Either we need a different kind of system entirely, like a presidential system elected, who has some authority, or we have a monarch who has more moral oversight of what's going on in her realm than seems to be the case at the moment. Anyway, I'm going to be addressing all these themes. Today is the 3rd of November. I'm also celebrating, we've just had All Souls Day yesterday, praying for all souls who've ever lived on earth. And then before that we had All Saints Day, so I may finish with a few references to the living saints of our tradition, and also the departed saints from my Book of Saints and Sages. And before that we had Samhain, or the Druid New Year. So firstly I want to begin by saying Happy New Year to all my Druid, pagan and Celtic friends out there. We've also had a great independence rally for Scotland in Glasgow, a city I know and love well, just yesterday on Saturday. So I would have been there if I'd have been still living at the Castle of the Muses, because I've come to believe that the movement for Scottish independence is now inevitable. It will happen regardless of what I or anyone else says. And I will be actually supporting it, because I think it's about time the Scots, at least they can get independence from this dreadful Tory party and government. We now have a general election, and I'm hoping and praying that the people of Britain will wake up and vote these people out of office, reverse Brexit with a second referendum, which is the democratic way of doing it, I think. Much as I admire the enthusiasm of the Lib Dems to revoke, yes, but I think there ought to be a referendum as well, probably. Although under different terms than the first one, and it needs carefully thinking through. So what I've done, we're in this few weeks before a general election on December 12th. It's now November the 2nd, so we have a month and 10 days, which is about 40 days to work on this. And I've prepared a manifesto for all the Remain parties, as I call them, or Remain. I use the term Bremain as a counterbalance to Brexit. For all the Remain parties that could come together in a reforming alliance, a progressive alliance. And I'm going to read out the manifesto, and I'm going to comment on it paragraph by paragraph. This is now on the CBSA, or Centre for Remain Studies and Action website. uploaded last night. You can read all the 29 paragraphs. But I'm going to be giving a kind of commentary. So this is my Kabbalistic commentary on the written Torah, so to speak. Can I just say that above me you'll see the flags of Israel. We're in Apollo, the room of Apollo here at the Museum of the Muses, and we have flags from every different nation. Many of them, I'm looking at flags of Scotland and South Africa and Iran and America and Turkey and Canada and Wales, the Union Jack. I'm looking at the Catalan flag from, I'm also looking at the flag of Aquitaine. And behind me you have the Israeli flag. Above that is the Palestinian flag. You can't see that, it's slightly out of shot. Sorry about that. But, you know, if you're from a country that you feel you'd like to send me a flag, please send it. We'll hang it. This is the room of the international work for peace. I also have a huge French flag that was given to my mother as an honorary citizen of Dieppe. She was gifted with that. I have the Canadian flag as well, being a dual Canadian citizen. So anyway, this is the room of the flags and the room of internationalism. So I'm now recording to share this manifesto. I'm going to read out paragraph by paragraph. So firstly, the rationale. It's called a Manifesto for a Reform Bremain Alliance in the coming general election on December the 12th, 2019 in the UK. Rationale. In this most important general election for decades, the UK voters have several stark choices. Do we want to leave the EU or not? Do we accept Scottish independence and all that will follow from that? Do we accept the right of Northern Ireland and Scotland to decide their own democratic futures, inside or outside the UK and the EU? It is our belief that only a reforming, progressive alliance of parties, all pledged to reverse and prevent Brexit, can defeat the Conservative Party, who've taken us to the very brink of leaving the European Union. This in turn has pushed forward the momentum of Scottish independence that is now almost unstoppable. Only an entirely new written constitution for the whole United Kingdom might persuade the Scottish voters to remain inside the UK. Brexit has shocked the normally quiescent British voters into unrivalled activism and anger. Years of Tory austerities have awakened the liberal and social democratic and socialist conscience of our nation. And millions of voters throughout the UK are determined to stop Brexit, hold a second democratic referendum on this issue, to end years of Tory austerity, and to prioritise a Green New Deal, where we readjust our relationship to nature as a whole and prevent further environmental catastrophes. This manifesto, if adopted by all reformist and Remain parties, would lead to their not standing against each other in the forthcoming general election, and would lead to a Tory defeat and the coming into power of a reformist alliance of progressive parties who could stop Brexit democratically, see justice done against lawbreakers in the 2016 referendum, write and agree a written constitution for the UK, let Scotland have her second independence referendum, and prioritise peace and justice for the UK's foreign and domestic policy agenda, and insist on the veracity of parliamentarians henceforth by law. These are momentous proposals for momentous times. To demand anything less is foolish in these endful times. Right, so that's the little preamble. I don't think I need to explain that much further. I mean, just to say endful is a word I've coined, premised on the idea of, something that's full of endings. We're living through endful times, like meaningful or whatever. These are full of endings. We're having possibly, I think, certainly the ending of the UK as we've known it. Whatever happens in this general election, the Scots are leaving. And God forbid, possibly we have the end. Well, I would like to see the ending of the Conservative Party. I don't think it deserves to exist anymore. I think there should be a sort of new kind of centrist force, I don't know, Christian Democrat Party formed by the good people that are left in the Conservative Party, Dominic Grieve, Kenneth Clarke. There's some thinkers. The Conservative movement has been around since the 1820s. I can't believe it's been brought to its knees by the lying shenanigans of Dominic Cummings and Donald Trump, like an anti-intellectual mobster, effectively. Unbelievable. Where are the genuine thinkers of conservatism in Britain? I don't know. Well, they're certainly not in the Conservative Party, and they ought to be leaving it immediately and setting up an alternative. Anyway, so this is my proposed, Bremain agenda, and even if such a thing were to happen, a proper, genuine Christian Democrat Party would be formed along the model of, say, Germany, then they'd be welcome to join this Bremain alliance again, and have moderate Conservative standing, who would be opposed to Brexit, because this radical right-wing cabal that's been hijacked is being taken over by very skillful use of data manipulation, so on, engineered by Steve Bannon and their cronies, and so I think it's disgraceful. Anyway, I'm going to go through it paragraph by paragraph. 1. Suggested governing principles for the Bremain Pact of progressive reformist parties in the UK general election December 12, 2019. Okay, number 1. Right, so suggestion that Bremain parties and election candidates form a Bremain alliance and agree to stand only one authorised candidate in each constituency. This could include candidates from the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the Labour Party, the SNP, Plaid Cymru, Change UK, the Alliance Party of Northern Ireland, and the SDLP, Social Democrat and Labour Party of Northern Ireland. Even some unionist candidates in Northern Ireland might back the Bremain alliance, along with some more moderate Conservatives. It might have to be negotiated at grassroots levels in some cases. If individual MP candidates agree to back this manifesto, and more than one per constituency does, then the official Bremain alliance candidate will be the one whose party won most votes, last general election in 2017, or the last time the seat was fought for. That's easy to work out. Anyway, look, this is the first paragraph. It's obvious that's what people are thinking. They've got there. I mean, they don't need me to spell it out. I'm just articulating and writing out what I think is in people's minds. People are realising this is the way to stop the Tories. I suppose what's different is I would like that Bremain alliance that the Greens, Lib Dems and Plaid are negotiating with the SNP as well at the moment to include Labour. And I would like the vast majority of Labour candidates and Labour Party members who are for a second referendum, and even Mr Corbyn has now agreed to hold a second referendum, even though his instincts are more kind of Brexit, as we realise. Nevertheless, I think if Labour Party members and officials and people like Keir Starmer, and there's a vast, I think, majority of people in the Labour movement realise that Brexit is a disaster and a nightmare. So it could join this progressive alliance, and I would like to see Labour part of it. I'd like to see, where Labour came second last time to the Tories, then everyone else stands down and votes Labour. Where the Lib Dems came second last time, then everyone stands down and lets them have a crack at the whip, and so on with Plaid, SNP, and so on. And I think it would be very important that Labour should join this. So this broadcast is to all my friends, whatever party you support, and as I say, even moderate Conservatives should I mean, a lot of them are resigning and joining in droves and saying they're going to vote Lib Dem, like Matthew Parish in the Times, and every week a new Tory MP sort of joins the Lib Dems. I mean, okay, but the problem with that is we don't want the Lib Dems losing their identity and becoming a sort of spin-off of the Tory party. They're not. We have our completely own history and culture, and it's a liberal culture. And I'm afraid, there's some issues there, which I might come back to later. Number 2, whichever of these parties came first at the last general election, their candidate would be endorsed by the Bremain Alliance, and all Bremain supporters would be asked to vote for them, providing they were actually genuine Bremain candidates, pledged to either a second referendum and or revocation of Article 50. And I give a website where you can calculate, who came second last time. Where it's a Bremain party person that came first, then nobody should stand against them, like the Green MP Caroline Lucas. I think the Greens have a chance of winning Stroud, so I think that person should be allowed to go forward. I think it's Molly Cato who's coming to stand there, and Stroud I know and love well. It's a great town in Gloucestershire there. Number 3, all candidates elected to the House of Commons would pledge to enact legislation for a second referendum and or to simply revoke Article 50 immediately. Either or both. There's no harm in revoking it, because then we don't have to keep getting these 3 monthly suspensions. Just revoke the thing, but then have in our own time, having legislated properly, an authentic and robust second referendum. So I can see an argument for doing both, actually, because this current farce, where that 2016 referendum, which was illegally engineered and run, is kind of hanging over our heads like sort of Damocles. That's why the Lib Dems are saying just revoke it. But there's then after due debate and consideration, the parliamentarians could decide, well, we'll have a second referendum, but this time it'll be under different rules. Okay, number 4. All Bremain candidates, and by the way, I use the word Bremain, you can use Remain if you want. I just prefer Bremain. All Bremain candidates would pledge, if elected, to authorise the creation of a royal commission for a written constitution for the UK. If Scotland votes for independence in 2020, the commission would have 2 sections, and one would concern solely a written constitution for Scotland. Well, this is important, this is big stuff, because really it is time we had a written constitution in the UK. I have one in Canada, my other country, there's one here in France. I know my rights, I can read them. I have a right not to be just, hauled off by the police and stuck in a cell or whatever, because I have a written constitution backing me up. And I can take the government to court, I can challenge politicians if they're acting outside the constitution, etc. The argument hitherto against a written constitution, and I've seen it from both ways, is that, well, no, because just having it in writing doesn't mean that people aren't scoundrels still. Look at America. The US has a written constitution, and yet they act so abysmally and total scoundrels. That didn't stop Trump seizing power, did it? Whereas if you have it unwritten, then a certain unwritten spirit should pervade the workings of governments and parliament, sort of unwritten rules, we could say. And that argument for a while held sway with me. However, I've now come reluctantly to the view that a written constitution is necessary. It needn't be long, it needn't be complicated, it need just set out some basic principles. And I'm suggesting that this new progressive government that we hopefully get elected on the 12th of December would have as one of its missions, to create at least a royal commission to draft such a constitution. Jeremy Bentham, one of my intellectual mentors when I was a student at the University of London, which was largely his creation at University College, he wrote written constitutions for other states. We've never had one in the UK. I think the idea that we didn't need one was based on a sort of moral superiority complex. We're Brits, we do stuff right, we do things fairly. We don't need it in writing because we just know that there's a difference between right and wrong. Well, hang on, I'm not sure that we do anymore. I think there was an older generation when I was growing up as a kid of politicians that, yes, that was true for. And I think in the Elizabethan the Victorian times, it was true. I think if you were caught doing something totally scoundrelly, you resigned on a matter of honour. And so we didn't need a written constitution. There was an unwritten constitution that we stuck and played by the rules. What we now have is a bunch of career politicians on the hard right who act completely outside of the rules. They've invented a new game. People like Dominic Cummings and Johnson and their cronies, Priti Patel and all the rest of them. They sit on the benches of Parliament sneering and mocking as if they're from a different planet. You know, I don't recognise these people. They have no sense of inner shame or honour. And the rudeness with which Johnson has been, lambasting Corbyn and everybody that doesn't agree with him, is unconstitutional. And John Bercow was right to keep pointing out. Sadly, unfortunately, he stepped down, which I think probably was a mistake. But a written constitution would set out the rules and duties of the offices of state, the role of the Supreme Court, the limitations on the power of the Prime Minister. There's nothing in writing to prevent a Prime Minister, if he can command or she can command the majority of Parliament, from instituting a sort of dictatorship. And there's nothing in the Constitution that prevents, fascist totalitarian rule by Parliament if a dictator gets into power, which is what they're trying to do, which is what Trump and Cummings and co are actually working on. I think a written constitution is finally necessary. And anyway, number 4, it's pledging to create a royal commission for that purpose. If, as is extremely likely, Scotland becomes independent, then I think they would want their own written constitution. I mean, leave it to them, but I imagine they would, and therefore the commission would then split, and one party of it would go off and work with the Scottish government as it moves towards independence. And I imagine that the Scottish people would. I know they've had a constitutional convention and they've done lots of deep thinking about what kind of Scotland they want. So, anyway, a royal commission could help that thinking along. There is, of course, the other slight issue that Scotland might decide also to become a republic. It might not want to keep the monarchy. It might see that as a feudal imposition from an ancient age. It might even want a different monarchy. It might want a different lineage of monarchy. I don't know. But all that will be left to the Royal Commission for a Written Constitution for the UK. Okay, number 5. All Remain candidates would pledge to fast-track legal and police inquiries into all illegal actions undertaken by Leave campaigners during the 2016 EU referendum. Well, that to me is just common sense. I'm absolutely appalled it hasn't happened. It's as if the police have been taken over and the Crown Prosecution Service by the very people that they're supposed to be investigating. I don't know what Johnson and Cummings and so on are doing in terms of trying to stop those inquiries, but I think, thank God, they finally seem to be moving. Well, all Remain candidates would pledge, once elected, once forming a government, to make sure that process happens. These people broke the law. The details need to be found. Dominic Cummings is in contempt of Parliament. He refused to give evidence. Boris Johnson is in contempt of Parliament. He refused to give evidence to the committee as requested. And these people should face legal accountability. That's why we need a written constitution. It never occurred to us when I was growing up studying British constitution. What do you do if you get a rogue Prime Minister who lies and thinks they're above the law and tries to shut Parliament down? What? It just wouldn't be in one's mind. And what do you do if the state broadcaster, the BBC, colludes in this process and never challenges what's going on? Ever since the 2016 referendum was misapplied and misinterpreted by the Conservative Party of Theresa May. It never occurred to us that we would have to somehow seek redress using the courts against these politicians. We now have a window to vote them out of office. There is a problem, of course, which is in terms of electronic voting, I don't trust the mechanism because I know, I keep reading posts that the electronic voting system is in the hands of some Tory businessmen. You know, just as with the election of Bush and Gore, when there was cheating, how can we prevent cheating? I think we should have a paper-only ballot. Postal vote's fine, but there should be a paper-only ballot because the electronic form of voting is far too easy to tamper with. And I think that they should, you know, legislate against that because it's hacked. It can be taken over. It's too dangerous. If we're going to have genuine democracy. Likewise, the police themselves need investigating. There needs to be an investigation into why they've dragged their feet, why they've been impotent in the face of crimes and high crimes and misdemeanours. The civilians among us need to be able to say to the police, look, you know, here's some laws been broken, go and chase the robbers. Right, number 6, all Remain candidates would pledge to introduce new legislation before the second referendum. A, no offshore money from persons not entitled to vote in the referendum permitted for advertising and promotion in any shape or form. Now this rules out Russian, American, Saudi, Israeli, any kind of offshore money, Chinese, I don't know where it's coming from. But these are countries that have nothing to do with British politics and shouldn't have any influence on it. And I think it was scandalous that Donald Trump thinks he can, you know, kind of tinker with and influence British elections. The man is a rogue politician in his own country facing impeachment. I mean, he's a criminal. And how dare he, as Corbyn rightly said, you know, try and interfere in our election. It's only people like Farage who are themselves with criminal tendencies that will support them. So no offshore money permitted. 2, all UK citizens wherever domiciled should be entitled to vote and whatever age. I think this business about if you've lived abroad for 15 years shouldn't matter. If you are a UK citizen, then you should be able to vote in this crucial referendum, whether you live in, you know, South Georgia, the Falklands, you know, Timbuktu or France, as I mainly do, and all UK citizens should be able to vote. Also, 16 and 17-year-old citizens throughout the UK should be entitled to vote in this coming second referendum. I think it's fair because it's their future. They are the generation that will very soon grow up to reap the tragic consequences of not being allowed to vote. So, Remain candidates will be pledged to giving the vote to all 16 and 17-year-old UK citizens in that second referendum. And also, all European Union citizens who've been living in the UK for at least 6 months should also get to vote. Because they're settling, they want to, you know, live and work in the UK. We should encourage our European friends. Just as I can come and live in France, they can go and live in Wales or Scotland. And many parts of the UK welcome EU immigrants. They should be given a voice. And again, Remain candidates should say, yes, they can vote. 7. Now this is, moving on. Remain Alliance candidates to pledge an end to austerity and to scrap immediately universal credit and replace it with a citizens' income scheme whereby all UK residents receive a basic living wage, whether in paid work, voluntary work, or self-employed. Now, this is a big idea, and I'm suggesting this as something that I think all the Progressive and Remain forces would get behind, because it's obvious that this universal credit scheme is an absolute nightmare. It's forcing people into suicide, it's forcing people into depression, forcing people into suicide by anxiety. I mean, it's unbelievable that we in Britain, famous for our sense of fair play and justice, should have tolerated this thing being introduced. It must be just repealed, absolutely. And the complete opposite approach. You see, the idea of the Tories is make it really, really difficult for people to get benefits. Force them to kind of either go homeless and live through begging or get a job, you know. But there aren't enough jobs for people. especially if I don't know, people's circumstances are all different. So then people go into sort of anxiety mode, and Marianne Williamson talks about this, because in the USA it's even worse, because people are living with chronic economic anxiety, because there are few benefit systems available in the US. Now this whole thinking needs challenging and changing. And this is what the Green Party have championed right from the beginning, and I take my hat off to them. This is a Green pledge, which is they want to replace that panic economic anxiety system, which is premised on fear, which is how the Tories rule, with one premised on love and cooperation and enoughness. Instead of, there's not enough. No, we say there is enough, actually. It's just a question of how we share it out and how we generate more, So we, as Marianne Williamson says, we have to energise and capitalise on the youth, on the people with ideas, on the entrepreneurs, on the social entrepreneurs, to generate the wealth, but don't tie that with income exclusively, so that if you're unemployed living in Bristol but you have brilliant ideas, you've just got a degree from the University of Bristol, my God, you might have done philosophy like I did at Bristol, you've got 10 idea plans for businesses, and instead of having to go on the universal credit because you can't find a job, and you don't want to work for some corporate banking scam system, or selling insurance, or chasing up debts, or working for the military, you've got ethical ideas, well then you can get a citizen's income, and you would have a consultant that you would work with to develop your projects and ideas. You'd be funded more generously than you'd be given a living wage, and then grant support, guidance on how to access funding and so on to get your projects off the ground. My premise is that everybody wants to give to society. That's what work is. It's giving back to society. And that people should be encouraged and facilitated to do that. Now that's the liberal approach to employment. You see, William Beveridge, who was one of the great liberal economists and thinkers, who was, in a sense, indirectly one of my mentors at the University of London. I used to go to endless lectures on political philosophy in the Beveridge Hall when I studied at the university, and he was the dean of the London School of Economics. He made Senate House. He made the University of London buy Senate House land and build Senate House, which is where my doctoral thesis was examined and where my School of Slavonic Studies was based. So, and Beveridge said in his wonderful report about the welfare state in the 40s, commissioned by Churchill during World War II, he said, look, this will only work if we have full employment. We haven't had, and we don't have, and the model the Conservatives are playing with will never create it, because the model the Conservatives are playing with is one of scarcity and fear, and it's like a Puritan idea that life is about suffering, and you should work as in like it should be painful, and then if you're not working, then you should be like punished. So if it was up to them, they'd probably bring back debtors' prisons, and the make it a shameful thing to not have lots of money. It's like a complete inversion of values, because it was Christ who said, blessed are the poor. He didn't say blessed are the rich. And yet Britain is supposed to be a Christian democracy. We live in a constitutional structure which is founded and developed by the saints of the early church on the basis of the early Druids. Well, we've turned our back on those fundamental truths, that blessed are the poor. And therefore we need to help them. And those of us that are rich and have, whether it's rich in ideas or knowledge or whatever, money, then we should be working out a way to help the poor. The best way I think has been come up with yet is the Citizens' Income Scheme. This has been applied in